Alright, yo, let me know if you can hear me. Uh, get started soon. If you can hear me, just write in the chat. That'll be helpful. Alright, we'll wait a little bit for more people. Yo, can you hear me? Yo, welcome. If you can hear me, write so in the write in the chat. Okay, cool. Well, welcome. Why I always have to ask my... I mean, I don't know, this is... You have to make sure there are no technical problems so that, you know, something stupid doesn't happen later on in the freaking, you know, live stream. We need our favorite schizo friend, Julius, to come. Kind of sucks. We're on a roll and then got interrupted 3 times, actually. So, let's go. He's here. Welcome. Yo, World Builder, if you could invite some people like Nioski, Fritz, who else would be here? Nioski, Fritz, Drumstick, Seamus, Ollie, if you can, that would help. Yeah. I think we're gonna start in like 5 minutes. I mean, unless more people show up really quickly, I'll start earlier. Yeah. Steep curve. All the way up to 4 now. Oh, we're at 7. Okay. I hope this thing fixes itself. I don't have time for this, to be honest. Okay. Here's Nioski with his horrible Albanian language, but welcome. Glad to see you here. I mean, as long as audio works, like, should be fine. Should be all good here. Okay, I am a little sorry to World Builder specifically. Oh, okay, Drumstick, welcome, sir. Why is Drumstick non-moderator? It's kind of funny, like, at this point the entire server is gonna just be freaking moderator, but there we go. We're gonna make a moderator. Yeah, I'm gonna apologize in advance to World Builder and Drumsticks. I'm gonna restart from the start just because, like, partly for the new people like Uncle Sam Nioski, um, Markist, man, because they missed what I already said, and then they came in and it was just the stupid call and nothing really came out of that. So Napoleon Bonaparte. Bro, that's gonna be so funny when we do that. That's gonna be the next thing on this channel after. I'm gonna try to live stream the King Charles finale tomorrow if I can, and that should be all good. Okay, whatever. Honestly, we have 7. Bruh, now we just went to 5? What happened to our homies? Let's invite Seamus. He was helpful last time. Who else should we invite? I think that's it for who I'm inviting. Yeah. Alright, Quinn Discord now. And we're gonna get started. And hopefully a bit less interruptions this time. I hope. Okay, we're gonna start in 1 minute, 8:55. That's when we're gonna get party started. I'm gonna move my phone too. Alright, it's 8:55. I love being homo. Bro, that's not the best way. Okay, anyways. We're getting started. Welcome, folks. Quick reminder for those of you who don't know. When we are discussing Christianity, we are discussing everyone who self-identifies as Christian. Whether I personally believe they are Christian or not is not really the point of this presentation. There are definitely groups in this presentation who I do not believe were actual Christians, but again, this is meant to be as neutral as possible. There is a slight bias. I'm not going to pretend there isn't. This is also a bit less serious than my usual presentation, as in there's not really a script. Of course, I have stuff written down, but I might make some more jokes. This is going to be a little more free flow than my normal stuff. Anyways, most of you guys already know this, but this is just for anyone new in the audience. And for the maps, I've made all the maps myself, and you will see those maps throughout the presentation. All right, everything good? Let's get started. All right, so we're going to start with the birth of Islam. This is where we left off last time. So we are going to see how that has changed society and Christianity. So we're going to start off here with a picture of Muhammad, and with this act alone, I have already committed blasphemy. So if you don't approve, you can write dissociate, DISSOCIAT, in the chat. And we're gonna see what you guys think of that. In the meantime, in 610, supposedly the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad in a cave in Mecca. And after this, Muhammad began preaching a new religion, which brought him some followers but many more enemies. Eventually, as he challenged the pagan rulers of his city, they began plotting against him. In 622, he was actually kicked out of Mecca and forced to flee to Medina in an event known as the Hijra, something which marks the official start of the religion of Islam. Muhammad decided to convince his enemies of his faith by waging war, slaughtering them, and by becoming a warlord. By his death just a decade later, Muhammad had reconquered Arabia and united the Arabs for the first time in history under his new faith. Now, here is a map of what Christianity looked like right before the rise of Islam. So we can see that the Aryans, so again, for those of you who might have forgotten, the Aryans are those who believed that Jesus was created by God the Father. They had mostly died out by this point. The Lombards, as we can see over here in Lombardy, those guys were still Aryans, but pretty much everywhere else they died out. There are a few Aryans here from the Visigoths. but not many left. Now, the Nestorians, who were the main Christian group in Iran, remember, Iran at the time also included Iraq and other parts of the world. Iran was Nestorian at this time, so Nestorians were those who believed that you should not call Mary the mother of God, but Mary the mother of Jesus, because of the distinction between Jesus' divinity and humanity. So that caused a split. And then there was the Oriental Orthodox, so they were the ones who believed Jesus had one nature instead of two natures. And so that was the main thing that differentiated them from the Chalcedonians over here. So we can see that the Oriental Orthodox were the majority here in Syria, Armenia, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And the Nestorians, of course, are here in Iran. And the Chalcedonians are basically everywhere else. So we can see North Africa, Gaul, Iberia, Italy, Greece, Anatolia, the Adriatic coast, Scotland, parts of Ireland, and the Anglo-Saxons had began converting by this point. So let's just check the chat. Is this episode going to feature LeBron James? Of course it is. Dissociate? Yes. Yes, I knew Drumstick would come in talking about the whole Iran stuff. Greater Iran, Iran Zamin, Iran Shah, referring to Iran, Iraq, and Central Asia. Yes, we should rebuild Greater Iran. I want to see something like that. I'm just gonna close the door here real quick. Alright, so let's get to the first Muslim invasion. So after Muhammad's death in 632, he was succeeded by Abu Bakr, who became known as the first Rashidun Caliph, or rightly guided. That's what Rashidun means. Taking advantage of the weakened Eastern Roman Empire and Kingdom of Iran, the new Rashidun Caliphate was able to overrun its enemies. The Muslims attacked both empires, but I will mainly focus on the Eastern Romans because they were Christians and also they were cooler. In 634, the Rashidun army began their invasion of the empire in the attempt to conquer the Levant. Emperor Heraclius was sick and unable to lead his troops at the Battle of Ajnadyan, in which his army lost decisively. Now, the Rashidun army was led by the incredible general Khalid ibn al-Walid, who won another decisive victory at the Battle of Fal, which allowed them to conquer Damascus by the end of the summer. More impressively, he won a major victory at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636. The Rashidun forces caught Heraclius' forces in between two cliffs, which again, if you know anything about military history, is always the worst, and forced a pitched battle, and it was at this point that Heraclius lost control over Syria. So here we have over here Khalid winning at the Battle of Yarmouk, and I think you can tell who's in control in this situation. Now, with Syria conquered, the Rashidun Caliphate had free range over the entire region, and after a long siege conquered Jerusalem in 637, causing it to fall into Muslim hands for the first time ever. That summer, they also took Antioch and Gaza, and oh boy, do we have stuff to say about... No, we're not talking about Gaza here. Rashidun Caliph Umar promised to tolerate the Christians of Jerusalem and not to turn churches into mosques, and he allowed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to remain standing. And I've actually been there, by the way. It's pretty cool. Now, despite this, the tolerance, of course, was pretty nice, but the loss of the most holy city in Christianity obviously caused much resentment in the Christian world, especially because Jerusalem had been a Christian city, at least officially for 300 years and unofficially for almost 600 years at that point. And so here we have the Muslim invaders entering the Levant. Now, Eastern Roman Africa was totally cut off from the rest of the empire, and it was only going to get worse from here. After a short truce, the Rashidun advance continued, finalizing the conquest of Eastern Roman Palestine, Armenia, and Mesopotamia between 638 and 639. With just 4,000 men, Amir ibn al-As crossed into Africa from Palestine at the start of 640, conquering Babylon fortress, which, funnily enough, has nothing to do with the other more famous Babylon, and this one was in modern Cairo, and then he moved on to besiege Alexandria. The Eastern Roman defenders were overwhelmed and surrendered the city in 642, which basically ended their rule in Egypt. Now, the loss of Egypt was devastating to the Eastern Romans because they lost most of their wheat supply, which caused food shortages and greatly weakened their army. Although Alexandria was briefly retaken in 645, the Eastern Romans could not hold on to the city and lost it the next year. By 644, Cyrenaica and Egypt had fallen into Muslim hands, and Cyprus would be next in 653. Now, despite what you might think, though, most of the local Christians actually supported the Muslim invaders, because nearly all the land that the Muslims conquered was majority Oriental Orthodox, who had been persecuted for nearly a century by the Chalcedonians since Emperor Justinian, and so that was quite a silly move that he had made back then. Now, in case you thought this was the end, you're wrong, because the Rashidun invasions continued. In 647, their general Abdullah ibn al-Sa'ad began the conquest of Africa, and Africa at this time, by the way, referred to Tunisia, with its self-proclaimed emperor killed the next year. In 649, meanwhile, the governor of Syria, Muawiyah, set up the first Rashidun navy to end Eastern Roman harassment at sea, but it was actually mostly manned by local Christians, because as you can imagine, a generation that had grown up as desert tribesmen was not suddenly going to be capable sailors. Now, in 655, they actually won their first major victory at the Battle of the Masts, which ended Eastern Roman domination of the Mediterranean for the first time. 500 Eastern Roman ships were destroyed, and Emperor Constant II was nearly killed. And so here we have a depiction of what the Rashidun navy would have looked like. And here we have Emperor Constans II. So anyways, let's check in on... Last time Drumstick spent a lot of time talking about how Iran was greatly weakened because of a civil war. And we'll get to conquest of Iran soon. Okay, welcome back, Cab Calloway. I apologize for how badly that last stream ended, but it's good to see you here. Bro, this guy, Ave Lucifer, that's crazy. It's craziness in the chat here. And of course, you just have world builders spamming a bunch of nonsense. What would this stream be without that? Yes, Shameless, yes. Welcome back. Alright. So, the Rashidun navy was mostly based in Alexandria, but also used Acre, Tyre, and Beirut as its bases, with mostly Muslim sailors but Christian shipbuilders. As a result, the Eastern Romans began expanding their own navy, leading to the Rashiduns to respond in kind, and a naval arms race began. The Rashidun navy was designed to throw stones, while the Eastern Romans invented Greek fire, a flamethrower that could even burn on water. And crazy enough, even in 2025, we still don't know what they did. They kept it that good of a secret. Now, although the Rashiduns responded by covering their ships with water-soaked cotton, they faced the problem of not having many trees to cut down for the navy. And when you think of the fact that they controlled Arabia, Egypt, and the Levant, it kind of makes sense that these places are not well known for their forests. Now, Muawiyah's advances continued, initiating the first raids into Anatolia in 641, and he began preparing for a siege of Constantinople. But due to Anatolia's mountainous terrain, the Eastern Romans refused to directly engage with the Rashidun armies and would instead ambush the Muslim forces once they were being dragged down with their booty and their slaves. Now, in the border area between the two empires, the Eastern Romans evacuated the population and burnt down the land so that the invaders would have no food to eat. Hello. Yeah, I muted myself for a sec because someone walked in again. Okay, now I'm back. We're back. All right, so the defensive value of Anatolia allowed the Eastern Romans to hold on to their territory and fend off Rashidun attacks. So in 632, Yazdegerd III, which is kind of funny to say Yazdegerd III, became the king of Iran and began gathering an army to defend his country from the Rashidun invaders. They eventually clashed for several days at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636, in which the Iranian army was just destroyed. This allowed the Rashidun forces to conquer not just Ctesiphon, the capital of Iran, but the entire region of Iraq. Now, unlike the Eastern Romans, the Iranians were so weakened that they couldn't even use the mountains to defend themselves. In 642, the Rashidun army engaged the Iranian army at the Battle of Nabahand, which the Iranians lost so bad that their country basically collapsed. King Yazdegerd continued fleeing east until he was assassinated in 651, ending Iran's independence. Now, luckily, if there's anything we learned, is that Iran's military today is really good, right? Well, not really. So yes, over here is just them getting slaughtered. This is them getting just destroyed. Pretty pathetic. Okay, so we get to the first fitna now. So in 656, the Muslims were on a massive roll, having conquered huge parts of the civilized world in less than 25 years. However, that year, the third Rashidun Caliph Uthman was assassinated and succeeded by Ali. But Muawiyah refused to accept his authority, and this created the first civil war in the caliphate known as the First Fitna. Now, the Muslims were fighting each other, so a group called the Kharijites came up with a genius way to stop the fighting and just decide to assassinate the leader of both sides. Which, keep in mind, I actually think that, that might be an effective strategy for a lot of the current wars we have going on today. In fact, it did actually end the war and allowed Muawiyah to become caliph in 661, ending the Rashidun Caliphate and starting his own Umayyad Caliphate. As part of this change, he changed the capital from Medina to Damascus, which, if you remember, that's in Syria, and that's because Muawiyah was the governor of Syria. Now, the Eastern Romans were not stupid, and they took advantage of the first fitna to reinforce their defenses and reform the army and military establishment. But under General Uba ibn Nakfi, the Umayyads were able to reconquer nearly the entire North African coast during the 670s. In 674, a massive Umayyad fleet entered the waters near Constantinople and began raiding the coastline. They then began besieging the city, but were pushed back thanks to Greek fire, and this was so devastating that the siege ended 4 years later. One of the many Muslims who died during the siege was Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who had actually been Muhammad's personal standard bearer. And so here we have the Greek fire. I mean, if this isn't sick, I don't know what is. Like, you have flamethrowers from the Middle Ages that burn on water. You can't get more cool than that. Now, although the Eastern Romans faced many external threats, they still found the time to argue over Christology once again. As Emperor Heraclius had tried to reconcile with his Oriental Orthodox subjects after the conquest of Levant by Iran, he proposed that while Jesus had two natures, he had one energy, a doctrine known as monoenergism. And in case you're wondering, no, I still have no clue what this actually means. He also embraced the idea that Jews had one will, a doctrine known as monothelitism, which was embraced in most of the empire, but most crucially, the two most important cities, Rome and Jerusalem, both refused to accept this doctrine. In 648, Constans II decided that the way to solve the controversy was to just ban people from even discussing it. But Pope Martin I held a Lateran Council of 649 to condemn monoenergism and monothelitism. Now you might think at this point, well, there you go. It's done, the Pope has condemned it. Actually, the Emperor was just mad, and 4 years later, Martin was arrested, tried, and exiled for treason. Now, Constans II's son, Constantine IV, after surviving the siege of Constantinople, wrote a letter to Pope Donus to solve the controversy, but he was too busy being dead, so his successor, Pope Agatho, agreed instead. And this is Pope Martin I in exile, not having a fun time, but at least he gets bread, so that's something. So Emperor Constantine summoned Patriarch George I of Constantinople to a council in the city on the 7th of November 680, and 37 bishops met in the palace. This was the beginning of the Sixth Ecumenical Council and the Third Council of Constantinople, and a letter from Pope Agatho was read, asserting that Jesus indeed had two wills. Patriarch Macarius I of Antioch defended monothelitism, leading him to be removed as a bishop. The council concluded that Jesus not only had two natures, but also two wills and two energies. A monothelite priest tried to prove that he was right by raising a man from the dead, but the corpse was brought in, and after praying in his ears, bro remained dead, so the monothelites kind of got BTFO'd at that point. Now, with this concluded, the decision was sent to Pope Agatho, but he was also busy being in heaven, so it was accepted by Pope Leo II instead. Now, the defeat of the Umayyads in 678 caused a massive setback, with the Eastern Romans successfully reconquering both North Africa and Anatolia. Now, even worse for the Umayyads, the second fitna broke out in 680 and would last a full 12 years. However, once they got their shit together, they destroyed the Eastern Romans at the Battle of Sebastopolis and conquered Armenia. They also began reconquering North Africa, resulting in the fall of Carthage in 698 and Tangiers in 708. Now, Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian II, you'd think he would be doing something to help out, but instead, he was such a next-level genius that amidst all the chaos, he decided that the best move would be to massacre the only army that had stayed loyal to him, creating a super weak empire by the end of the 7th century. So yeah, that's Justinian II. I think this says all you need to know about him. So we can now look at the state of Christianity in 700. So despite the lightning advances of the caliphates, most areas remained Christian in both former Iran and Eastern Rome, with only the Christians of Arabia being wiped out. By now, the British Isles had been fully converted and were a major presence in the Christian world. Now, Arianism had all but disappeared, with only a few followers left in Spain. But speaking of a Christian world, by now became increasingly difficult, since for the first time since Constantine, very large amounts of Christians now found themselves under heathen rule, and those that were not were now firmly split between East and West. So we can see Arianism has basically died out. We have a couple of diehard Arians here in southern Anatolia, but they're basically irrelevant. The Nestorians still exist, but have sort of been pushed up here to northern Iraq. The Oriental Orthodox are basically the same as they've been, but we can see Chalcedonianism has now fully spread to the British Isles, fully spread to Iberia, fully spread to Gaul, Italy, North Africa, large parts of Germany, as well as of course Anatolia and Greece. But we can see there's already this east-west split right along this line here, and this split will become important later on. Foreshadowing, guys. So in 710, Witiza, the king of the Visigoths, died, and a civil war broke out between his son Aquila and Roderick. Aquila fled to Umayyad Morocco after losing and asked them to help him reconquer the throne, because if there's anything we learn from history, it's that every time you rely on a foreign power to get the throne back, that foreign power will definitely not just take over the country themselves. After a few raids revealed the Visigoths' weakness, the Umayyads began preparing to invade. The invasion was led by Tariq ibn Ziyad, who led 15,000 Berbers in 711 and defeated Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete. After this, the Umayyads conquered city after city, including Toledo, which surrendered peacefully. Within 2 years, nearly the entire kingdom was conquered, but Tariq had never even gotten approval to invade and was summoned back to Damascus by Caliph al-Walid, who punished him, and I think either by imprisoning him or maybe executing him, I forgot. But this shows just how easily the Umayyads just destroyed the Visigoths. It's not even close. Now, the incompetent emperor Justinian II was deposed for a second time in 717 by Leo III the Isaurian. However, right as he took the throne, a massive army of 120,000 under Umayyad prince Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik reached Constantinople, reinforced by 1,800 ships. Now, I think it's important to recognize just how huge this army was, 120,000 men. I mean, even Roman armies, I think, were not that big. So this is one of the biggest invasions of all time. Now, the siege would last for 13 months, and the Umayyads tried blocking off the Eastern Romans at sea as well, but they were stopped once again by Greek fire. Eventually, the cold and the lack of supplies forced the Umayyads to get reinforcements, but most of these were Christians who defected as soon as they arrived. So yeah, maybe not a good idea to recruit Christians to fight Constantinople. Now, eventually, famine and plague set in too, and this forced the Umayyads to return home. And those who did also then faced a storm and a volcanic explosion. So it really couldn't get worse. One could say that this was God's punishment, but hey, I'm not here to cast any judgment. Now, by 720, the entire Visigoth kingdom was conquered and only Asturias remained independent of Muslim rule. Despite this, the Umayyads continued their momentum and began to advance into Gaul. They began raiding Aquitaine before engaging in battle with Charles Martel, the Frankish mayor of the palace, at the Battle of Tours in 732. The Battle of Tours was a major victory for the Franks and ended the Umayyad invasion for good. So this is Charles Martel. I've actually talked about him in my Ancestry of King Charles. You should check out part 1, go more into his life there. But he basically kind of ran the kingdom because the king of the Franks was useless. And he's known as that because of his martel, or in other words, little hammer, which he wielded effectively to crush the Muslims. So looks pretty epic here. I've always liked this drawing. So the siege of Constantinople 718 marked the end of the near constant Arab-Eastern Roman wars as the border stabilized along the mountains of eastern Anatolia. From now on, the Muslims would only raid the Eastern Roman Empire instead of trying to conquer it. Now, the Frankish victory at Tours in 732 marked the end of exactly 1 century of Islamic expansion since the death of Muhammad, and is seen as a major victory in Christian history. From now on, Muslims and Christians would keep fighting, of course, but the Muslims no longer posed an existential threat to Christendom. And so with that, let's check the chat here real quick. Okay, we had like 8 people. Bruh, now we're at 4. Okay, let's read some of these. This is where you got the best crossover in history. Perils the Thirst plus Tang Dynasty. Let's fight the Arabs. Oh yeah, because there was the Battle of Talas in 751, right? Now, why does Hagia Sophia have minarets? Actually, I don't know. Uncle Sam 2018 now response. The Monothelite priest was wild. Yeah, I thought it was funny. That's why I included it there. You don't get the thing about Trinitarian heresies. I mean, yeah. Like, the thing is about the Trinity, right? I think you can be like, oh yeah, okay, Arianism is kind of stupid. Like, Father, Son, Holy Spirit are all co-equal. But then once you get into like, oh, 2 wills, 2 energies, like, bro, no one cares. Especially since that makes like literally no difference in practice. Islam is just a cult centered on worshiping Muhammad. Alright, I'm wondering, chat, who's still here? You can just write some in the chat. I'm just gonna get water real quick. I'll be back. It's a fact. It's true, but I don't want to get dissociated, right? Like, it's one of the things I fear most. Alright, Chad, I'm back. No! Guys, we're only at 3. Bruh, everyone left. Uncle Sam and okay, now we have 4. All right, well, thanks to the few of you who are still here. So, anyways, this is what Christianity now looks like a century after Islamic expansion. And we can see it's not really that different. The Muslims haven't actually converted that much. You know, it got a little expansion there. You know, obviously a little expansion here in North Africa, but not that much. But we can see the clear east-west divide. So after the volcanic explosion of 726, tsunamis began forming in the Aegean Sea, which led Leo III, the Isaurian, to believe that God was punishing his empire. He decided that the icons were to blame and ordered the removal of an icon of Christ from the entrance to the Great Palace of Constantinople to be replaced with a cross. Some people were so offended by this act, though, that they murdered those removing the icon. Nevertheless, Leo III ordered in 730 that icons would no longer be venerated because it was a form of idolatry. Leo's orders were opposed by Patriarch Germanus I of Constantinople, who either resigned or was deposed depending on who you ask. Now, Pope Gregory III was also opposed to the emperor and actually held 2 synods to condemn it. Now, although Leo III died, his son and successor Constantine V continued his iconoclastic policies when he became emperor in 741. In 754, he summoned the Council of Hieria after the death of Patriarch Nicephorus I of Constantinople, during which 338 bishops attended. Now, they stated that icon veneration had become common after the last ecumenical council held in 680, and that one shouldn't depict Jesus because an icon either depicts his humanity alone or confuses his humanity and divinity, which either resulted in Nestorianism or Oriental Orthodoxy, at least in their eyes, and they considered both of those as heretical. Now, many people did not accept this council because none of the bishops of the Pentarchy were in attendance. With Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem under Muslim rule, no bishop in Constantinople, and the Pope wasn't invited, so a bit of a failure. Now let's learn about a very nice bromance story, Pepin and the Pope. So in 751, Pepin the Short, the son of Charles Martel, was crowned king of the Franks by Pope Zachary, which established the Carolingian dynasty. Also, by now, Arianism had completely disappeared. I just had to, mention that. In 754, the Lombards conquered Rome from the Eastern Romans, leaving them only in control of Calabria, Apulia, Sicily, and Sardinia within Italy. As a result, Pepin led a Frankish army against the Lombards in 756, defeating the Lombards, and then gave former Eastern Roman territory not back to the Eastern Romans, but to the Pope as a gift. This became known as the donation of Pepin, which is something, a lot better than the super chats, which I definitely receive in the chat when I make these streams. Now, this resulted in the creation of the Papal States, a country that would be ruled by the Pope. So we can see how exhilarated the Pope was to receive this from Pepin. I kind of think that the Pope got the better end of the stick, but hey, you can write in the chat who you think this benefited more. The Rise of Charlemagne. That's a pretty sick picture. Honestly, this is one of the coolest pictures I've ever seen. So in 768, Pepin was succeeded by his son Charles, who became known as Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, which is a Frenchified version of Carolus Magnus, Charles the Great in Latin. Now, Charlemagne greatly expanded his kingdom's borders and also conquered the kingdom of the Lombards in 774. In 772, he began his Saxon Wars, a series of 18 campaigns to subjugate the pagan Saxons and forcibly convert them to Christianity. After the main Saxon leader Widukind was defeated in 785, he was baptized, and this marked the beginning of the end of the Saxon resistance. Now, under Charlemagne, the Franks experienced a golden age known as the Carolingian Renaissance, which saw an increase of the arts, literature, jurisprudence, and liturgical and scriptural studies. The period also saw the standardization of Latin and a real separation between Christianity as practiced by the upper class and the common people. To address widespread illiteracy among the nobility and clergy, he founded schools and attracted the most educated men from Europe to his court. Now, someone can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I believe Charlemagne himself could barely read or write and sort of learned it in older age. But he really made an attempt. And so we can see here Charlemagne surrounded by bishops and monks were really the main scholars at the time. So one of the strongest defenders of icons in the Eastern Roman Empire was John of Damascus, a monk and priest who is considered by Catholics to be the final church father. So for those of you who might not remember from earlier streams, the church fathers were essentially the early Christian leaders who sort of helped develop Christian doctrine. Now in 765, Stephen the Younger, a monk from Constantinople and a leading opponent of iconoclasm, was executed because many monks opposed iconoclasm. Many monasteries were shut down, causing the monks to flee to the edges of the Eastern Roman Empire. And for those of you who remember how monasticism started in the first place, this is sort of an ironic circle back moment. Now, when Emperor Constantine died, he was succeeded by his son Leo IV the Khazar, who tried to find a compromise. After his death in 780, his wife Irene of Athens became empress, and unlike Leo, she was actually in favor of icons being used in church. In 784, Patriarch Paul IV of Constantinople died and was succeeded by Tarasios on the orders of Empress Irene. 2 years later, she decided to hold an ecumenical council to resolve the iconoclasm crisis. They met in the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople, but the meeting was broken up by iconoclastic soldiers. To deal with this, Irene just spread disinformation and told them that the Muslims were invading Anatolia, only to then have the other soldiers disarm them. In addition, Patriarch Tarasios, despite being a bishop, used deception as well, getting 2 monks to pretend to be the bishops of Antioch and Jerusalem and having these so-called bishops agree to his demands. I don't know, this is just funny to me because this seems like such a modern thing to do. Anyways, let's go back to the chat. Okay, we have 6 people now. It's good to see. Banquet of Chestnuts. I actually don't know what that is. Could you tell me? Oh, the Pope had honest prostitutes. Oh, okay, I see. Also, welcome, No Shells. Try to bring Nioski back if you can. I was enjoying having him here. The Pope had an orgy. Banquet of Chestnuts, more like the banquet of these nuts. Ah! Welcome back. Women with chestnuts between their legs. What the heck? And I thought I'd seen the worst of the Pope. Okay. This in California. That's funny. Alright, let's continue. So, on the 24th of September 787, the council was finally held in Nicaea, with 308 bishops attending. Now, one who didn't attend was Pope Adrian I, who sent a letter approving the veneration of images, but severely criticized the Eastern Romans for interfering with his rights. Now, the council ruled that veneration of icons was acceptable and that every church altar should contain a relic. The proceedings of the council were sent to the Pope, who approved it. The council is seen as the 7th ecumenical council, and at least for the Eastern Orthodox, the final ecumenical council. And here we have the iconoclasts forced to bow down and agree to icons. And the fact that this itself is an icon is pretty funny and ironic. We have the emperor over here. Now, in 788, the Eastern Romans sent an expedition to Calabria in order to detach the kingdom of the Lombards from Frankish control and restore Adalgis as their king. The Second Council of Nicaea also proclaimed the unity of the Pope with the Eastern Roman Emperor, while neglecting to mention Charlemagne, something which angered him since he was trying to strengthen relations with the Pope. So, maybe they should have just like tagged Charlemagne in, the post being like, yo, we just fixed iconoclasm. I don't know. I mean, if they had Instagram, maybe it'd be easier these days. As the Eastern Roman expedition failed, Pope Adrian I's relationship with Charlemagne was restored, and the Franks refused to accept the council at their 794 Council of Frankfurt. At this council, Theodulf, the Bishop of Orleans, claimed that Irene was promoting idolatry, which, let's be honest, is true, and cited church fathers such as Augustine of Hippo as proof that venerating icons was indeed wrong. However, the Pope just rejected this council and nothing came from it. Now, a female ruler. What do we think of this? Especially since my entire audience basically is male. Now, up until now, Irene was technically ruling on behalf of her young son, Constantine VI. But she wasn't exactly the greatest mother. In 797, deposed and then blinded her own son to seize the throne herself. Now, as you can imagine, this isn't the best look, and this didn't go well either back home or abroad, and many people doubted whether a woman could even rule by herself. I still have my own doubt. What? Anyways, as such, Pope Leo III decided that she was no longer legitimate, and there needed to be a new Roman emperor. I think some of you can see where this is going. Now, Pope Leo III, who now was no longer under Eastern Roman control, but instead under Frankish protection, decided that he needed to suck up to Charlemagne. In 799, he was also attacked and nearly had his eyes and tongue removed. Dang, being a pope was so dangerous back then, making him realize he needed a powerful protector, and after the attack, he fled to Charlemagne's court. Charlemagne then brought him back to Rome in 800, and the Pope decided to give him an extra special Christmas gift. During Mass on Christmas, Pope Leo came up to him. I always imagine he just snuck up behind him and crowned him as Emperor of the Romans, officially creating the Holy Roman Empire. And so here we have it. Pretty glorious and epic picture. Probably wasn't as cool looking as this, but it gives you the vibes of it all. So now let's check. Oh my gosh, bro. I go back. Was this Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang. Spent 3 racks on the U chain. My dog love drink propane, yo. Yeah. So we have World Builder does not like Catholicism. Alright, well, I'm not sure what I think of this, but, okay. At least people are commenting, I enjoy that. Anyways, hopefully a few of you might comment on the actual stream content, like Charlemagne. That would be cool. But anyways, Monarchist Man, we appreciate the support. Oh no, Uncle Sam's has joined the Gucci gang. Anyways. So after his coronation, Charlemagne sought recognition from the Eastern Romans. Now, despite the rocky start to the relationship, Charlemagne was actually trying to, rizz up Irene a little bit, maybe eventually unite their two empires through marriage. And he actually sent a marriage proposal, maybe, these days you slide into the DMs, be like, yo, you kind of fine, Irene. But before she could even reply, she was deposed and replaced in 802 by Nicephorus I, who refused to recognize another emperor because he was the alpha male Roman emperor and Charlemagne was not. Now, Charlemagne sent a peace offer to Nicephorus, but then he also chose to die and was replaced by son Michael I Rangabe, who did recognize Charlemagne as emperor. Now, this is Charlemagne in his old age. Now, he died in 814, having established himself as the most powerful Christian ruler in the West since the end of the Western Roman Empire, having proclaimed himself as their successor and allied with the Pope. Despite this, his Holy Roman Empire never turned into a real country of any sort, and was always more of a title than a reality on the ground. His decision to call himself emperor and other issues such as the Filioque clause was stated that the Holy Spirit proceeded from both the Father and the Son, created an even bigger rift between the East and the West, and this would only become worse when an old argument would start again. I knew you liked Charles the Great. So this is now what Christianity looked like in 820. Again, not some radical changes, but we can clearly see a couple of things. Arianism, as we've noticed, is gone. Nestorianism has been destroyed even more. It is now basically only found in northern Iraq. Oriental Orthodoxy is still going mostly strong, but has lost large parts of Syria, but still going strong here. Eastern Anatolia, Armenia. It basically still has total control over Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And as for Chalcedonian Christianity, we can see a clear divide. We have the East over here, which is Greece, Bulgaria, Albania, Macedonia, that area, the area around Crimea, Georgia, and Anatolia and Cyprus, as well as Jerusalem over here. And then we have the Western Chalcedonian Church, which includes, of course, all of Italy, Croatian coast, a large part of Germany at this point, the Low Countries, Gaul, the British Isles. But we can see now that Islam has actually taken over very large parts. And when I say Islam, I mean the Muslims as a group conquered pretty much the entire peninsula. But in terms of religion, almost all of Iberia was now predominantly Muslim, with the Christians only remaining the majority up here in the north. So you thought the iconoclast controversy was over. You're wrong. Part 2 was beginning. Meet this guy. Now, Leo V the Armenian was Eastern Roman Emperor in 815, and he had been losing battles. So you know what? He decided to blame the icons. Yep. He once again removed the very same icon from his palace that Emperor Leo III had once done. And at a council in Constantinople that year, he officially revived iconoclasm as a state policy. Now, when his grandson Theophilus died in 842, his wife Theodora became regent for the son Michael III, and like Irene, also decided to restore icons. On the 3rd of March 843, another council of Constantinople was held to confirm the decisions of the Second Council of Nicaea, and deposed any iconoclastic bishops. And so the entire thing was useless. And now we have ended the Dark Ages, and we will move to the conversion of Europe. So if we have any questions, comments, any of that, now is a good time to write it, and then we'll move on to the next part. Why are we singing Dude? I don't know. I don't inherently mind the rap lyrics in the chat if you want to do that, but I would also like to get the people who are interested in the history to have a shot asking some questions, just giving their thoughts. Glorious video. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it. Yeah, we had 19 views so far. That's good. This is Toby Keith. Bro, I don't know who Toby Keith is. I assume he's country, but like, bro. Charlemagne is the last true Christian king. Based on what? Long live the Crusades. I don't know. We probably won't get the Crusades today, but we might. But that's for the future. Anyway, we appreciate the feedback. Y'all, guys, my voice is so sore. Like, you have no idea. Not my voice, my throat, I should say. All right. Next part, the conversion of Europe. Harold Clack. In 826, Harold Clack, the king of Denmark, was forced to flee the country by Horik I, who replaced him. Harold ended up at the court of Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious. Louis offered Harold the Duchy of Flanders, but of course there was a catch. This was in exchange for a convert to Christianity, which he accepted. When Harold returned to Denmark, he was accompanied by Asgar, a Frankish monk, who was there to convert the population. But Harold was kicked out of Denmark by Horik again, and Asgard decided, you know what, Denmark's not even worth it. He decided to just convert Sweden instead, which is pretty funny. Asgard, though, did return to Denmark in 860 and befriended King Horik II, who gave him land for a chapel. And so here are the missionaries arriving in Denmark. So let's look at what Central Europe looked like after Charlemagne. In 840, his successor Louis the Pious died, and his three sons fought a civil war to determine who would become the next king of the Franks. This eventually resulted in the Treaty of Verdun in 843, in which the kingdom was divided between West, Middle, and East Francia. Not very original, but it gets to the point. In 828, meanwhile, Pribina, the prince of Nitra, established the first Slavic church, and 3 years later, Mojmir I, first Duke of the Moravians, was baptized by a Frankish bishop. But he was deposed in 846 by Rastislav, who instead looked to the Eastern Romans for support. Now in 863, Cyril and Methodius, two Eastern Roman missionaries, arrived in Moravia and translated the liturgy into the local language, which eventually turned into what's known today as Old Church Slavonic. This was much more successful than Western attempts, which had forced Latin liturgy and relied on German priests. If you know anything about the Czechs, is that they do not like the Germans, so not a good strategy. Now, despite this, though, Moravia would end up under papal control because its new duke, Svatopolk I, expelled the disciples of Methodius. In 884, meanwhile, Borovoid I, the Duke of neighboring Bohemia, converted to Christianity and once again was first influenced by Eastern Christianity, but then rivalries with Moravia led it to Western Christianity within a decade, which is funny because Moravia also became Western Christian. Now here are Cyril and Methodius, and although I did not say too much about them in this slide, they are some of the most important people in, well, just history in general. In fact, pretty much the Cyrillic script is named after Cyril, and that is the main script used by a lot of the Slavs, including most notably the Russians today. And now here we get to one of the most complicated moments, the Bulgarian controversy. So in 852, Duke Rostislav of Moravia allied with Knyaz Boris of Bulgaria, as a response to the threat posed by Charles the Bold, the king of West Francia. East Francia responded by declaring war on Bulgaria and forcing them into an alliance against Great Moravia, which was an Eastern Roman ally. Now, war broke out between the Eastern Romans and the Bulgarians in 855, resulting in Bulgaria losing. Now, since the Eastern Romans were sending Cyril and Methodius as missionaries to Great Moravia in 862, Boris decided, okay, well, I'm going to do the opposite, so he asked for German missionaries for Bulgaria as a response and as a way to say screw you to the Eastern Romans. Now in 857, Patriarch Ignatios of Constantinople was deposed by Michael III for political reasons and replaced by Photios, who literally had no experience in the church. Photius began arresting the bishops supportive of Ignatios, who then appealed to Pope Nicholas I. Nicholas sent 2 bishops to investigate the issue, but Photios, he thought 3 steps ahead and he had them bribed. As a response, Nicholas held a synod in 863 where he excommunicated Photios, so in other words, kicked him out of the church, and this created the Photian Schism. Now, this displeased Emperor Michael, who wrote a letter to the Pope condemning his claim to superiority over other bishops and the use of Latin. And so things are getting a little spicy in the church, one could say. Now, within the context of the schism, the Eastern Romans invaded Bulgaria again in 863. The invasion happened because the Eastern Romans did not want Boris to convert to Western Christianity. Now again, I think it's important to remember, keep in mind that the Franks and the Eastern Romans supposedly were part of the same church, yet they were invading other countries to make sure that their version of Chalcedonianism prevailed. Now, after the war, Boris sued for peace and promised to accept Eastern Roman missionaries in exchange for having his land returned. In 864, a mission from Patriarch Photios I of Constantinople arrived at Boris's capital at Pliska and converted him, so to say, and his court members. After this, the Bulgarians began converting to Christianity, with the Eastern Romans encouraging them to destroy their pagan holy sites. So this is Boris over here. In 865, Bulgaria's nobles led a rebellion against Boris, intending to kill him and to restore paganism. After his battle with the rebels, Boris won and killed all the nobles by killing half of the aristocracy in the process. Now, for many Bulgarians, becoming Christian, though, meant coming under Eastern Roman control. So to alleviate these fears, Boris asked them to grant the Bulgarian church independence, something which you can imagine the Eastern Romans refused to do. Now, after this refusal, Boris sent a letter to the Pope with 115 questions about how to organize his church. The Pope responded with 106 answers. I guess he had none for the other 9. And he sent a mission led by this guy, Bishop Formosus. Now, Formosus had found great success in converting the Bulgarians to Western Christianity, and he actually went around denouncing the Eastern Christians for the crimes of 1, allowing priests to get married, 2, using leavened bread in communion, and 3, not using the filioque, because again, this seems to be, the real core of Christianity is, the kind of bread you use in whether you use the filioque clause or not. Now, in response, Photios attacked Formosus and the Western Roman missionaries for the crime, again, of using the filioque. And for those who forgot, this just means that they believe that the Holy Spirit comes from the Father and the Son instead of just the Father. Now, Boris asked the Pope to appoint Formosus as Archbishop of Bulgaria, but he refused because Formosus was already a bishop. Now, the Pope also then sent envoys to the Eastern Roman Emperor Michael III. With the Pope's answers in hand, Boris then expelled the Eastern Roman missionaries, so Michael III held a council in Constantinople to prevent Bulgaria from falling under the Pope's control. The council then excommunicated Pope Nicholas I and rejected his claim to papal primacy, his contacts with Bulgaria, and once again his promotion of the filioque, because for some reason this seems to be the biggest division in the church. Boris then moved back negotiating with the Eastern Romans for the 3rd time now, but Emperor Michael III died in battle in 867, and he was killed by Basil I, who became emperor instead. Now, he was smart. He deposed Photios, who, again, let's remember, had no experience and literally bribed people, and then he brought Ignatius, and this finally ended the schism with the West and the Pope. Now, Pope Nicholas I died in 867 and was succeeded by Pope Adrian II. Boris proposed to him that the papal legate to Constantinople, Marinus, should be Bulgaria's bishop. The Pope refused and instead sent over Sylvester, a random dude who didn't even have permission to lead Mass. Now, unexpectedly, I'm kidding by the way, Boris was quite insulted by this move and he wrote an angry letter to the Pope. Man, Boris just cannot get a break. It's like everyone is just constantly betraying him. Now, during this time, we got the 4th Council of Constantinople. So Basil I held another council in 869 in Constantinople, which one condemned everything Photius had done and deposed him, but he still continued Eastern Roman claims over Bulgaria because, he wants that real estate. Now, Photios was out and Ignatius was once again made the Patriarch of Constantinople. Now, at this 4th Council of Constantinople, icons were now required to be equally venerated as scriptures, and also the veneration of Mary, angels, and the saints were encouraged. It also placed the Patriarch of Constantinople as superior to those of Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem. And based on what? Well, just because they were the imperial capital, I don't think Jesus, Paul, or anyone else in the New Testament actually cared about Constantinople. But there you go, that's church politics for you. Now, right after this council in 870, Boris's envoys arrived in Constantinople and agreed to fall under Eastern control. Again, this is the 4th time now, in exchange for getting an archbishop. This would be the first time a national church would be created in Christian history. Now, just as things were starting to get settled, Ignatius died in 877, and guess who's back? Frickin' Photios. I'm not even kidding. Now, although this didn't please Pope John VIII, he negotiated a settlement where he would accept Photios' return to power in exchange for being recognized as the head of the church. Wow, these guys really, it was all a power game for them. Photios was asked to apologize, but of course he refused to do it, but he did accept the Pope's control over Bulgaria while doing nothing to actually enforce it. Now, I think it's clear that by this time the Western and Eastern Christians saw each other as rivals, with one led by the Pope and the other by the Emperor. Essentially, by the end of the 9th century, the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, as we know them, had been fully formed. Their arguing over controlling Bulgaria, while both being part of the same Chalcedonian Church, shows how divided the Church had become. Bulgaria adopted the Old Church Slavonic as their liturgical language, and the Cyrillic script, invented by Cyril and Methodius, as their script. This would mark the start of the Bulgarian Golden Age under Eastern and not Western Christianity, despite attempts by Pope Adrian II to regain his influence there. And look, the popes, they could have gained control if they didn't send a literal nobody to go to the Eastern Romans. Oh, and by the way, Formosus, that guy we talked about earlier who was really successful in converting the Bulgarians, he actually ended up becoming pope, and then he died, and then his corpse was put on trial and then condemned. And I'm sure some of you know that story, but some of you might not know, so that's pretty interesting. And so, yeah, now let's check the chat. Oh, we had 9 people, okay. I imagine some person saying, apologize to Emperor Michael. Why am I reading directly off the slides? I mean, I can't remember all this information off the top of my head. I'm just really reading off the slides and adding in my own commentary. Catholicism is inferior to Eastern Orthodoxy. Okay. Unblock, bro. I've not blocked anything. I think you can see I have been on the slides. I'm not blocking anything. It's probably one of the 6 moderators we have who did that. Also, I get what you're saying in terms of slideshows for a normal presentation at school, or you already know what you're talking about. But this presentation is hella long, so there's no way I could remember all of it. Why did I ignore your chat? Bro, why is everyone's dunking on me? I haven't ignored anything. Half my stuff doesn't show. Look, dude, I have no clue. I'm not censoring anyone right now. Church politics talks as hell. That's true. It is. Yeah, take it up with the mods, bro. I've not been interfering in the chat whatsoever. We'll wait a few more seconds. I'll go back. All right, may I continue? Agree with Uncle Sam here. Anyways, let's keep going. You guys can argue it out in the chat yourselves. That's not my business. All right. Now let's get to the creation of the medieval papacy. So by now the papacy had experienced many changes that would result in it generally taking the form it held until quite recently. In 769, the Lateran Council was held, which barred the people from choosing the Pope, because I guess they had been able to do that. I didn't know that. Instead created the first cardinals to do that in their place. So that's where the cardinals come from. 781, the Apostolic Chancery was created, an office that would collect money for the papal army and create documents for the Pope, because, what's a Pope without, a good amount of tithes and an army for himself? In 858, Nicholas I, the guy who we see here, was actually crowned pope for the first time, starting a tradition that would continue until 1963, because they're really trying to emphasize that they're just humble servants of God and not just corrupt, power hungry. Anyways, I won't get into it. And starting with Marinus I in 882, the popes would adopt a Latin-only policy in the church because, of course, we know that 0 books in the New Testament or the Old were written in Latin. Okay, so now we get to Christianity in 880, and I think this is one of the most interesting map updates because it really explains a lot. Now, first of all, we can see the Nestorian church is just getting destroyed. After, centuries under Islamic control, there isn't really much left. You have, of course, a few here in eastern Syria and northern Iraq, which ironically is like ISIS territory, but, basically destroyed. We still have some Oriental Orthodox left in Syria, but not that many. Now we can see also starting to reduce in Egypt, but still going pretty strong in Sudan and Ethiopia and Armenia. Now we can see that the Chalcedonian church is now quite homogenized in the sense that there isn't a geographical barrier, but obviously we can see there's a massive cultural barrier by this time. Now we see Bulgaria, which is over here, has become Chalcedonian. We see that some of the Slavs over here have also converted. The South Slavs as well have become Chalcedonian. And we can see as well that more of Germany has become Christian as well. But we can also see that, for example, Crete and Sicily are no longer Christian, and that's because these places have actually converted to Islam. And we can see the same thing in southern Spain, again, mostly Islamic. And then we also have a little bit of non-Christian lands over here. Now, I think some of you can guess already, but for those of you who don't know, that's because this is where the Vikings settled, and the Vikings at this time were pagan. So that is why you have parts of the British Isles that have now deconverted from Christianity. Almost the reigns of Ethelstan, all the Great. Yeah, we will be mentioning some of those. So in 910, the Abbey of Cluny was founded, which soon became the largest, richest, and most prestigious monastery in Europe. The abbots of Cluny were able to create a network of monasteries that reported to them and was free from state and bishops' interference. Instead, they only had to report to the Pope. Monasteries, convents, and cathedrals operated almost all schools and libraries and promoted economic growth. And they also taught, apart from just reading and scriptural studies, metallurgy, introduced new crops, created and preserved literature, and even invented musical notation. And so here's the Abbey of Cluny today. Seems like quite a nice place. I wouldn't actually mind being a monk here. Famous last words. But it looks pretty nice and peaceful. But yeah, you would hardly guess that this is somewhere that was once the intellectual life center of the European continent, at least in the West. Now, the Bulgarians and the Eastern Romans kept going to war, and after 2 Bulgarian victories in 917, they decided to screw over the Eastern Romans by elevating their church to a patriarchy, something which was previously only held by the Big Five: Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Antioch. Now, at the peace treaty signed in 927, the Patriarch of Constantinople was forced to recognize the Bishop of Preslav as the Patriarch. Now, later on, during other wars with the Eastern Roman emperors, the Bulgarian Patriarch would move his seat to Ohrid in 990 after doing a few town hoppings, one could say. Conversion of Poland, y'all, scream if you love Poland, metaphorically, or literally if you want, because I can't hear you. You can write that in the chat. So on the 14th of April, 966, Mieszko I, the Duke of Poland, I also made a video, not directly about it, but he's in my ancestry video, so go watch that. He converted to Christianity and was baptized along with his court. As is often the case in these situations, his wife, Dubravka of Bohemia, was already a Christian and influenced his choice. After this, various churches were built across Poland, and clergy was appointed, with the first bishop being appointed 2 years later by the Pope. Mieszko's son Boleslaw the Brave became duke in 992 and supported missions to neighboring lands, most notably to the pagan Prussians. Now, Mieszko's decision helped strengthen his grip on power because it united his people under one faith. It also improved Poland's prestige in an increasingly Christian Europe and improved relations with the papacy. And so we have Mieszko I here and the conversion of Poland. Now, with both Western and Southern Slavic peoples converting to Christianity, the Eastern Romans decided why not get the Eastern Slavs as well, which is what they did in the 9th century. After the Bulgarians, some Rus began converting to Christianity, enough that Archbishop Photios, that famous corrupt patriarch, felt it necessary to send them a bishop in 867. But these efforts failed, and the Rus would remain pagan for generations. Now, in 945, Olga, pictured here, the Princess of Kiev, visited Constantinople, where Emperor Constantine VII fell in love with her. But she wanted to avoid him. He gave her the ick, so she made him her godfather at her baptism, which is basically the medieval version of friend zoning. After this, she requested a bishop and priest from Rome, funnily enough. And however, despite her conversion to what was actually Western Chalcedonianism, her son Sviatoslav I remained a staunch pagan because he believed his warriors would lose respect for him if he converted to Christianity. It's all about that status, guys. His successor, Yaropolk I, who took the throne in 972, may have began getting ready for baptism, but he clearly was not ready enough, and he was murdered in 980 by his half-brother, Vladimir. Now, despite being pagan himself, Vladimir would become known as the Great precisely for adopting Christianity. But he had a dilemma. In 987, Vladimir consulted his nobles and sent envoys to study the religion of the 4 neighboring peoples: the Muslims, who were the Volga Bulgars, the Jews, who were the Khazars, the Germans, who were the Western Chalcedonians, and the Greeks, who were the Eastern Chalcedonians. And this is one of the most interesting and famous stories in religious history. Now, his envoys reported that the Muslims were always sad and they smelled bad, and once he found out that he had to get circumcised and couldn't eat pork, he was not impressed. He did not want to be a Muslim at that point. But worst of all, Islam banned alcohol, and that was a deal breaker. Now, Vladimir also didn't adopt Judaism because basically he believed that the fall of the temple, which again, if you remember, that was one of my first slides, that happened in 70 AD, the fall of the temple in Jerusalem proved to him that the Jewish God must not actually be that powerful. Not sure about the logic there, but again, the part about Muslims being sad and smelly isn't exactly much more logical either. So now all he had to do was just compare Western or Eastern Christianity. Now, his envoys considered the German churches to be quite gloomy and ugly, and for those of you who sort of know like the Romanesque kind of somber style at the time, that was true. While the Mass at Hagia Sophia was so splendid and impressive that they did not even know whether they're on earth anymore or straight up in heaven. Now, despite how impressed he was by the Eastern Christians, Vladimir still chose to invade the Eastern Roman Emperor because he really wanted his sister as his wife. Now, the emperor agreed to send his sister Anna Porphyrogenita, again against her will. She, whether she consented did not matter at the time, but only on the condition that when she arrived, Vladimir would be baptized. And so, while it is unclear whether it was the beautiful Mass in Hagia Sophia or the chance to get with the emperor's sister that caused Vladimir to be baptized, but he did, and he converted in 988, and this marked the conversion of the Rus people to Christianity. And if that isn't a Russian story, I really don't know what is. And I do also have to say, it really is hilarious just how unspiritual this entire process is. Again, I can't really think of a single thing theological about this decision to become Christian. We could say that Vladimir was the first orthobro. He completely in it just for the aesthetics and to be based. And so here we have Vladimir getting baptized. Now, Vladimir first baptized his 12 sons and his nobles, and then destroyed the pagan idols and his principality, and the statue of Perun, the main god, was thrown into the Dnieper River. He then forced the entire population of Kiev to get baptized or become his enemies. He then built the first church on his land, called the Church of the Tithes. Vladimir's uncle, Dobrynya, forced the population of Novgorod to convert by threatening to burn down their city, while the mayor Putyata was a little nicer and only threatened them with a sword instead. And so yeah, that is pretty much the most Russian way I can think of getting people to convert. Literally, it's the Egypt Orthodox meme right there. Now, there is really likely no conversion in history that has been as political as that of Kiev. It resulted from a king wanting to drink alcohol and see a pretty church, and later on wanting to forcibly marry a random princess. Also, the entire way this was done was certainly not indicative of genuine conversion. But, for all that we can criticize the Rus for this decision, them becoming Christian helped them forge an alliance with the Eastern Romans, with their learning and literature spreading north. And under Vladimir's son Yaroslav the Wise, they actually created the first East Slavic literature. Anyway, let's check the chat, see what you guys think of this story. Egypt Orthodox. Let's write some Egypt Orthodox in the chat. May have been a small decision, but Vladimir actually made a great choice in this country. I agree. It was for pretty shallow reasons, but it's nice. Oh, okay, now we got 10 people. That's nice to see. Vladimir should have become... Oh, there we go. Drumstick is back now. We're up to 9. Nice. Nice. So, in the early 970s, Geza, who, again, I also made... Honestly, you guys should just watch my ancestry video. I mentioned all these people. Vladimir, Mieszko, Geza, Charlemagne... All these people I've mentioned, they're all in that ancestry video at some point. Anyways, the early 970s, Geza became the Grand Prince of the Hungarians, and once again, in a pattern that we're starting to see is pretty common, was initially influenced by Eastern Roman missionaries, but eventually was won over by the Western ones instead. In 997, Stephen I succeeded his father as a Grand Prince, and 3 years later made Christianity the official religion of Hungary, which now became a kingdom with his crown sent directly by Pope Sylvester II. I don't know if he used Amazon or some other delivery service, but he received it at some point. And this caused Hungary to fall into the Pope sphere, and its kings would become known as apostolic kings. So in 934, Hakon the Good became king of Norway and tried to convert his people to Christianity, but with little effect. Then around 960, Harold Bluetooth, a very well-connected king if you get what I'm saying, of Denmark converted to Christianity, although most of his subjects were actually already Christian at this point. In 975, Hakon Sigurdsson became king of Norway and rebuilt pagan shrines. Now, this angered Harold Bluetooth, who invaded Norway to force him to become a Christian, but his forces were just defeated in 986. And that's Harold Bluetooth, by the way, in case you're wondering who this is. That same year, Olaf Tryggvason, the great-grandson of the first king of Norway, met a Christian who predicted that he would be turned on by his own men, something which happened. By the way, don't misinterpret what I'm saying here, okay? Means they'll turn against him, in case you're wondering. Now, after recovering from his wounds, Olaf converted to Christianity and stopped raiding Christian cities and moved instead to the British Isles. When he heard that there was a rebellion against the king of Norway in 995, he returned home and he seized the throne. he decided to convert all his subjects to Christianity and converted not just Norway but also the Faroe Islands, Orkney, Shetland, Iceland, and Greenland. But he was killed just 5 years later at the Battle of Svolder, after which there was a partial pagan return until the reign of St. Olaf, which started in 1015, and not to be confused with Olaf Tryggvason, that's a different Olaf. And this is Olaf Tryggvason and his missionaries. Now, the same year Olaf Tryggvason became the first king of Norway, Olaf Skotkonung became the first Christian king of Sweden, but he didn't actually have enough authority to enforce conversions. Skipping ahead a few decades, Inga the Elder became king of Sweden in 1080 and decided to end pagan sacrifices, which caused a large outcry and forced him to flee the country. His half-brother Blotsvein became king instead on the condition of allowing sacrifices again. Inga wasn't done though, and he returned to Sweden in 1087 and burned Blotsvein's house down and then killed him as he ran out. Now, Iceland was one of the few Scandinavian states that did not experience a violent conversion, though there were still tensions between pagans and Christians. In 1000, the Althing, or parliament, decided to let Thorgeir Ljósvetningagodi, try and say that 3 times, the leader of the pagan faction, decide what Iceland's religion would be. And after meditating for a day and night, he chose to make his country Christian instead of pagan. Not sure why that is, but okay. Now, this was a very different approach from the first Faroese Christian, Sigmundur Brestesson, who first tried peace, but after being attacked by a mob, decided to break into the house of Chief Trondur Igotu and tell him to accept Christianity or lose his head. And you can imagine what choice he made. Now, by 1000, Eastern Roman Emperor Basil II had defeated his nobles and the Islamic threat, so he decided to invade Bulgaria and took a third of its land, becoming known as the Bulgar Slayer. Now, the Bulgarians became desperate and they decided to risk it all in one big battle at Kaledion in 1014, but they lost. The Eastern Romans then blinded 99% of the 15,000 soldiers they captured, with the 1% remaining to guide them back home. Eventually, the Bulgarians submitted in 1018, and Basil II officially downgraded the Patriarch of Ohrid back to an archbishop. The archbishop and his successors were now to be chosen by the Eastern Romans, while the monks and priests continued to be Bulgarians. So now let's look at Christianity in 1050. By this time we can finally talk of a Christian Europe, with nearly the entire continent converted, minus certain areas like northern Sweden, Finland, the southeast Baltic coast, and much of Russia. Meanwhile, most of Iberia and Sicily were majority Muslim. Despite this, many areas that had been under Islamic control for centuries, such as the Levantine coast, and parts of Egypt remained majority Christian, mostly Oriental Orthodox. But they did retain independence in Armenia, Nubia, and Ethiopia. But as you can imagine, the split between Western and Eastern Chalcedonians had been building up for centuries, and this tension was about to explode. And so now here we have a map, very nice map I have to say, of Christianity in 1050. So you can see that historians by this time are basically irrelevant. Tiny communities here and there, but pretty much not around. The Oriental Orthodox are almost all but out of Syria. There are some, of course, left in eastern Anatolia and Armenia. Holding out in Egypt, but not that much. Nubia and Ethiopia are still strongly Oriental Orthodox, though. You can see again, Muslims are still the majority in most of Iberia and all of Sicily. And we still have some pagans left in northeastern Germany, the 3 Baltic states, Finland, northern Sweden, and of course large parts of Russia. But essentially pretty much the rest of Europe has become Chalcedonian Christian. And so these are some of the new groups that have become Christian. Poland, remember Mieszko I over here. Hungary with Stephen and Geza. The Rus with Vladimir the Great and his successors. And then we have Olaf Tryggvason over here. The parliament in Iceland. Olaf Skotkonung here in Sweden. And different Danish kings. And so we can now talk about an actual Christian Europe. And that's it for that part of Christianity, the conversion of Europe. So let's check the chat now, see how this is going. Bluetooth was his last name was a nickname. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Maybe I didn't make that clear, but yeah, it's not a last name. Russian entire history is just LARP. First they LARPed as Christian, then as Romans, then as communists, then as down. That's actually, dang, I've never made that connection. That's actually true. Okay, what Trinitarian theology separates Nestorianism from Oriental Orthodoxy? So that's a good question. Essentially, basically, Nestorians emphasize more Jesus' humanity and the fact that Jesus was a human, separated from his divine self, whereas Oriental Orthodox are very much like, no. Like, Jesus' humanity and divinity are like one and the same almost. So that's why Nestorians and Oriental Orthodoxy really don't like each other. VC after stream? If y'all want to, sure. Why do these differences matter? I don't think they matter. I mean, again, I also, like, I'm not a huge ecumenical, like, oh, we're all the same, because we have too many of those. But at the end of the day, though, yeah, some of these literally do not matter. Like, especially the Oriental versus Eastern Orthodox, they're the exact same. It literally just is the thing of, like, one nature versus two natures. Anyways, we finished the conversion of Europe, so we've actually made it now to 1054. I was wondering, do you guys want to continue? Because we can continue if you want, or we can end it. It is kind of depends. Okay. What about the rest of you? What do you guys think? Should we continue or not continue? Got an eh. No. Yes. Okay. We'll continue a little bit to the Crusades, like the start, and then after that we can choose if we want to keep going from there. So now we get to the next part, high medieval Christianity. So we gotta look at the East versus West because it's gonna affect everything here. So we can see the divisions between the West and the East can be traced back all the way to the Quartodeciman controversy surrounding the date of Easter, all the way back in 180. However, they can fundamentally be attributed to the fact that after the Western Roman Empire fell, the Pope became the main political authority, while in the East, since the empire remained, the Patriarch of Constantinople never experienced this rise to power. As such, the land West ended up under papal influence, while the Greek East ended up under imperial influence. Now, there were many differences between the West and the East, but let's go over some of them. Firstly, Western priests were forced to be celibate, while Eastern priests did not. Now, whether the Western priests were actually celibate, do I have to say it? I won't say it. Now, also, Eastern Christians believed that every local church, with its bishop, priests, deacons, and congregants, constituted the church, so every bishop was a successor of Peter and was equal to other bishops. Like Western Christians, they did not believe that any one person had the final authority on church doctrine like the Pope. Now the Pope, meanwhile, he claimed to have the authority to appoint the bishops of all churches, and all bishops only had valid authority if they derived it from Rome, because only the Pope was the successor of Peter and Jesus' vicar on earth. The Pope then interpreted papal primacy to mean that he had the highest authority in the church, while the Eastern Church saw it as meaning he had the highest symbolic honor. Another central issue was the Filioque clause, which was added to the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed. And this was considered heretical by the Eastern Church because it was added later. And again, for those of you who do not know or might have forgotten, it's just the clause that says the Holy Spirit basically comes from the Father and the Son instead of just the Father. Now, there are also philosophical differences between the two sides because the Eastern Church objected to the Western Church's use of pagan metaphysical philosophy over the experience of God. And, you know, not to be too biased, but like low key, like they're right. And so, if we want to summarize another way, basically the West used the mind more, while the East used the heart more.
Don't slam it.
Hmm?
Don't slam it. You're going to damage it gently like this, okay?
Mm-hmm. I'm still in the stream, but I was just saying.
These are, I think, apparently yours.
Okay.
I'm going to give them to you.
Yes.
You're preparing a presentation?
Camera's on.
Okay. Change the camera.
Anyways, as we said, the West used the mind more, while the East used the heart more. The Eastern Church also rejected Augustine of Hippo's concept of original sin, even though his teachings were accepted by the Council of Ephesus and the Second Council of Constantinople. It's a little strange. What the East taught was that sin was not passed down from Adam, but instead sin corrupted the world, and so it's sort of like almost like it's in the atmosphere, so that's why we're all sinners. Now, they also disagreed on what happens after death, which is kind of a big deal, actually. Now, the East did not believe in purgatory, believing that suffering does not actually just cleanse sin the same way that the West did. Instead, they believed that aerial toll houses existed where souls are tested by demons while on their way to heaven. And honestly, before doing this research, I had literally never heard of this idea as a Christian. They also did not believe that hell was actually a place, but they believed that it was a state of choosing separation from God. Church governance also played a major role in the split. In the East, the main view was Caesaropapism, which meant that the emperor was the supreme authority not just over the church, or not just over the state, but also over the church. He was God's viceroy and had a special relationship with him, being his friend and the interpreter of his word, which is quite a convenient, thing to claim for yourself. I'm just going to say that. Now we finally get to the final straw. So in 1053, Leo, why is it always a guy called Leo? I'm noticing this. It was Leo, the Bishop of Ohrid, with the support of Michael I, Cyrillars. Oh my gosh, Leo and Michael. The Patriarch of Constantinople wrote a letter to the Western bishops attacking them for the crimes of using unleavened bread in communion, which, by the way, is what Jesus used, probably, and having different fasting rules. In response, Pope Leo IX, another Leo, wrote a letter in which he affirmed the privileges granted by Peter to the See of Rome. He also condemned Michael for claiming to be the most important bishop instead of just submitting to him. The letters were delivered to Constantinople by Cardinal Humbert of Silva Candida, who was received well by the emperor but not so well by the Patriarch. So on the 16th of July 1054, they laid a letter on the altar of Hagia Sophia, excommunicating the Patriarch and his supporters. So 4 days later, Michael returned the favor and he excommunicated the Pope. And so now we get the division. So the map is the same, I'm not going to go over it again, but we can see where the Roman Catholic Eastern Orthodox divide roughly along this line. You can see Eastern Roman Empire, Bulgaria, Serbia, and the Rus are Eastern Orthodox, whereas the rest are Roman Catholic. And so yeah, that's the kind of sad start to those churches. And in case you thought that was sad, well, now we have corruption too. So before 1059, many selections for the papacy were influenced by European rulers, often with rulers directly appointing the Pope. This was especially true of the Holy Roman Emperors, with Emperor Henry III, who ruled 1046 to 1056, being the last emperor to dominate the selection process. At this time, the selection process had started to become quite corrupt, with Benedict IX accused of selling the papacy in 1045, and when Benedict X was elected Pope in 1058, he was also accused of bribery. The cardinals who disagreed with the result elected Nicholas II as Pope instead, who then waged war against Benedict and regained control of the Vatican. So let's check the chat real quick. Let's just see what's going on here. I said Weast. Yes, I did. My bad. Either religion is right or wrong. One's literally plain true. That's true. Because I'm low key kind of annoyed you didn't mention anything about Leo and Michael excommunicating each other. I feel like that's kind of the perfect moment. I will not continue the stream until you say something about it. Gonna send Michael to Armenia in 1915. VC, okay, we'll VC soon. We have like a few slides left. Does anyone really want to continue? If so, just write so in the chat, and then we will keep going. I mean, we will go up to the Crusades because like 20 years from this point, but I'm just asking if anyone wants to go past that. And by the Crusades, I mean the first one. We're not doing all the Crusades today. Alright, so this is Gregory. During Easter 1059, Nicholas II called a synod in which he declared that nobles could no longer select the Pope and only cardinals could. He also banned nobles from appointing bishops. He seems to have a problem with nobles, I can tell. Now this greatly angered the German bishops, most of which were nobles or had been appointed by nobles. So they assembled in 1061 and officially rejected Nicholas II's orders. When Gregory VII was elected Pope in 1073, he began a series of reforms that would change Catholic history, trying to free the Catholic Church from any state control. He also reorganized the Papal States, which managed to increase his wealth and power. Pretty self-serving, yes. Anyways, in 1075, Pope Gregory composed the Dictatus Papae, asserting that he alone could depose a Holy Roman Emperor, and since the Catholic Church was founded by God alone, only the Pope had universal power. He also declared that he alone could appoint or depose clergy or move them from one bishop to another. But the new Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, I also talked about him too, refused to follow the bull and continued appointing his own bishops. So this marked the start of the investiture controversy in 1076, when Henry appointed his chaplain as Bishop of Milan, even though the Pope had already chosen a bishop for the city. So Pope Gregory just kicked him out of the church and deposed him, which released all of his subjects from obeying him. Now many of the nobles who, keep in mind, Pope Gregory had just deposed, jumped at this opportunity to seize imperial territory. Eventually Henry realized he couldn't keep control of his land, so he went down to meet the Pope at Canossa in 1077 to apologize. Now the Pope didn't trust him, so he forced him to wear a hair shirt and stand barefoot in the snow, eventually leading to Henry's excommunication being lifted. And so here you have Henry, his wife, and his son being forced to walk barefoot in the snow while all the priests and monks and bishops laugh at him. What are these two? What are these two? Anyways. Now, although the beef between Henry and the Pope was over, the nobles continued in their rebellion, and they elected Rudolf of Rheinfelden, the Duke of Saxony, as their king. Later, the Pope was just like, nah, and he decided to excommunicate Henry again in 1080. Henry responded by calling a synod at Brixen and proclaimed that Gregory was not a legitimate pope. However, once Rudolf died that year, the Great Saxon Revolt died with him. Following this, Henry appointed Clement III as pope, and marched his army to Rome and besieged it in order to kick out the real pope and install Clement. In 1084, the city surrendered, and on Palm Sunday, Henry officially installed Clement as pope, so Clement officially crowned him as Holy Roman Emperor. Now, Pope Gregory wasn't done, though, because he was hiding in a castle mere meters away, and he called for Robert Guiscard, the Duke of Apulia and Calabria, to save him. Robert obliged and entered the city with such force that Henry and his army fled, but the city was plundered, and the people of Rome blamed the Pope. As such, he had to run away south and died in 1085. After his death, the Normans of Robert Guiscard influenced the election of the new Pope Victor III, but Clement III just stayed in the Vatican and just refused to leave. Now, after Victor III's death, he was succeeded in 1088 by Pope Urban II, one of the most important popes in history. So, now we're getting to the context for the First Crusade. I think we'll probably end here. Does anyone really want to continue? Did I see what happened in Ukraine? Yeah, I think I did. Didn't Zelensky say he's willing to cede some land now? Save it for next time. No, okay. Yeah, we'll end it here. I mean, we got pretty far. We got 11 centuries in. It's pretty good, if you ask me. Anyways, guys, my throat is so sore right now, dude. Pokrovsk. We can have a VC and talk about it. I'm kind of at my limit. The thing with the Crusades, it's very epic, so we want to, have full energy, momentum for that. But I did see that Pokrovsk was about to be surrounded, if that's what you mean. GG. Bro, I just said I'm ending